Hello, everybody. Welcome to another conference today at the MEGAMIGS. The subject for this conference is what is the right business model for your game? My name is Charles. I'm a Monetization Director at Ubisoft Quebec, and I'll be your guide for this specific subject today. So if we're setting off on this adventure together, first of all, what are our quests? First of all, we'll be looking at what are the right questions. What would be the right questions to be asking if you are to identify what is the right model for your game? So that'll mean uncover the video game business model formula. Then we'll hone your crafting skills and dive a bit deeper into how business models are built for games. And then along the way, we'll discover some recipes for success, so different models. And then we're going to time travel, use foresight, so we can peek maybe 5 years into the future. So starting at the beginning and asking the right questions. What is a business model, right? The dictionary will give you kind of this simple definition of it's the systematic ability for a product, a business, or a game to create, deliver, and capture value. But for a lot of people out there, it looks maybe a bit more like this, kind of a black box, really. So you have a consumer or a player, and this black box that you don't necessarily understand, but as the player is traveling through it, you manage to extract some dollars. But for others, maybe it looks a bit more like this, where you insert a player, but rather you kind of crash and burn, and you're not really providing the experience as you should. A couple of examples of these is Fortnite. Fortnite, really one of the best-in-class products at the moment that's driving a lot of revenue within the market through its Battle Pass system. Really is greatly appreciated, but at the same time, Apex Legends, which tried to kind of copy the approach there with, again, a Battle Pass, didn't get the same reception. So similar model, but a different experience. I do want to say that Apex Legends has improved greatly since then, though. Another example of a similar model but a different experience is Hearthstone. So when it initially launched, great reception, really well performing, driving a lot of revenue. Artifact through Valve tried to produce a kind of the same thing, similar model again, but quite didn't hit the mark and was marked as one of the greatest failures for Valve. But what is interesting is that even though it's a similar model and it's not necessarily a success, there are still players out there that think that Artifact's model is considered fair. Again, another example within FIFA this time, FIFA drives maybe around 40% of Electronic Arts revenue. But at the same time, if you look at the user score, 1.7, it's not necessarily the most appreciated experience. So what are we trying to get to here? What I'm trying to say is that it's not necessarily that there's good and bad models out there. So you can have plenty of different models, but it's really in the way that you're designing this model that it can either make or break your game. And also what it means is that the right model is different for every player, for every game, and for every business. And also it means that your model should be about more than just maximizing revenue. It should be actually about trading value with your player base. So what you want is a win-win relationship. What you want really is a relationship. Unlike all other relationships, you should aim for something that's healthy, trustworthy, and based out of compassion, right? But really, all in all, what you're trying to do is that your game shouldn't necessarily repeat the model of others. Your game should try to build its own model. So the question becomes, what is the right model for your game? So if we are to crack open this black box together, we said we should be asking the right questions. Well, maybe that's not the right question. Maybe we should be asking, how do I design my game's own model? And well, that is the right question. So congratulations, the black box opens and it reveals its content. And we reveal here the video game business model formula. So kind of looks complicated like this, but before going any further, congratulations. That was our first quest. You've completed your first objective. And do take note, a new item has been added in your inventory. Let's call these black crystals, for example. So congrats, you have a black crystal in your inventory. So coming back to our formula, you're probably looking at this. Seems kind of plenty of different working parts working together. And you're probably asking yourselves, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? How does this work? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's our quest, our next quest on the list. Let's hone our crafting skills and dive a bit deeper. So when we're looking at this, basically it's not that complicated. Okay, it's 5 different key components that are working together. So an entry price, the game economy, distribution systems, products and services, and add-ons. Now, most people out there usually kind of think that the right order to go about things is to start with the entry price. I would argue maybe that's not the right question. You shouldn't necessarily be asking what's the right price for my game, but rather, should I even set an entry price for my game? And the right place to start at that, if that's the question that we're asking, is maybe more towards the end. So what are the add-ons that you could add to your game? So if you're selling this base game, how are you extending the experience? How long is your game lasting? So if you're selling a game that's rather short, couple of hours, and that's the end of it afterwards, and you won't be updating it anymore after, well then sure, set a price tag on that game and you're done, right? But if you're attending this talk, I'm taking into consideration that maybe you want to go a step further and seeing whether options are on the table. So I would argue that most games can be categorized in 2 different categories. There's session-based games and there's progression-based games. So a session-based game looks a little something like this, where your progression over time resets every time you move through a session, and it repeats over and over. A good example of this is Rainbow Six Siege, one of our successful titles at Ubisoft. And the way that you keep extending this experience is by adding additional gameplay ingredients to help refresh the meta. And these are typically called seasons, and then you repeat this process over time. So this usually takes the form of adding maps, operators, guns, gadgets, charms, and more over time. Take note that usually it's rather a lower cost to be updating and to produce this type of game, whether as a progression-based game, which looks a little more like this, is higher cost to produce and to maintain. So your progression in this type of game is kind of cumulative, right? So for example, you can have this player that keeps leveling up, completing quests, completing storylines. And a good example of this is Assassin's Creed. And you can keep extending this experience by adding more content. So you're building more parts of the world, more storylines, more quests, creatures, equipment, and more. And at this point, you're maybe asking, well, okay, if I'm selling my game and I keep extending it in the future, should my content updates be free or should they be paid? Well, let's say you've launched your game and it looks a little something like this. Your revenue curve through time looks a little something like this. However, your costs, because it is very costly to produce a game, looks a little something like this. So what we do note is that we're not necessarily reaching what we should to reach what we would call a success. Now, please forgive my poor paint skills for the visual quality of this graph. But if you are extending it, well, that's also additional costs. So maybe you're bumping up your cost through time to keep offering more value to your players, right? But what should you do about it? How can you correct this? How can you upswing that revenue curve a bit higher? Well, coming back to our black box, maybe every player you're inserting into that model is generating, I don't know, let's say $20, and we want to reach it around 25. Well, what can you do? What is the different options that are on the table? One model that you can work with is called bundling. So bundling additional value. So the value proposition for the player is to keep the fun going. So you keep adding more to the experience as you move along. So do keep in mind that the base game is great. You're not removing anything, but players do want more. Some players want to keep investing in time into your game. So you can keep adding more content. But keep in mind that if you do that, it should be optional, where you do offer a base game that's great in itself. So for example, you have your game and then you have your extended experience, right? And you have all these different content packs that you can keep offering. And maybe you're offering these a la carte once all of them are available. And maybe you want to commit yourself to offering part of this for free, but you still got to pay the bills, right? So maybe you're packaging part of the experience behind a certain price. But instead of players having to purchase all of these individually and repeat the process over time, maybe some of them will drop off. They won't necessarily be purchasing as much as you would like them to. Well, you can bundle a bit of stuff together, right? So you can add in extra value, so providing even more, not removing, but even more stuff. So you can give more armors, more perks or whatnot, extra content, and then bundle all of this together. So for example, the way that it's done, sometimes we can call this a season pass, and then you can repeat this process over time. So players aren't only purchasing the base game, they're purchasing extra stuff to extend their experience, and they're not only purchasing a small piece of content, but they're purchasing a bigger piece of content. So the average revenue per user is a bit going up. So the way that you impact your revenue curve over time, maybe it looks a little something like this. But again, maybe we're not satisfied, right? Maybe we're not covering all our costs. So let's keep moving forward and looking how we can keep pushing that revenue curve a bit higher. So this covers it for add-ons, maybe for entry price, right? So what is the right price for your game? So coming back to the different types of games, we usually categorize session-based games as easier to bring them into free-to-play. So you can choose to make your game free if you so desire to do so, or you can have it full priced or anywhere in between. But what I would say is if you do consider one of these within your options, it is usually easier due to the fact that session-based games are usually lower cost to maintain, to go free to play, whereas progression-based games are really kind of harder to bring into the free to play and tend to lean more towards full price experiences. However, there are counter examples to that. So for example, Genshin Impact is more of a progression-based game. It is free to play, and it does drive revenue by other means. Another example of a session-based game is the Call of Duty franchise, which is full priced. Sure, there is a campaign within that game and other game modes, but most players do purchase it for the fact that you can play multiplayer, and which is more session-based. But what I would argue is that maybe you don't have to choose between free to play and full priced. Maybe you can consider other options. Maybe you can consider having multiple price points for your products, so that you can reach out to multiple different players wanting multiple different things, right? So coming back to our initial model of bundling, well, maybe you can bundle again one step further. So you're bundling all your extra content that's coming after your experience within the game itself and bundling those together and selling it upfront within something you could call a gold edition. So what you're trying to do really is build the higher price points. So you have your standard edition, which includes the base game, which is full priced, maybe at around $60, but you're also trying to build towards a higher price point so it can drive additional revenue through a gold edition, or maybe add even more value for some players and then build towards an ultimate edition. So this is something that's commonly seen and that we do at Ubisoft, and that works really well, and players tend to appreciate. But maybe you shouldn't also be working towards satisfying players in that direction only, but also trying to get more players invested and making your game more accessible through time through a lower priced edition. So you can reach a wider audience, right? So maybe you can go for a starter edition, which is less costly, but maybe it has limited content. For Honor within our portfolio used this and worked really well to attract many other players that play the game for less and invest less for sure, but do add more value in the experience for other players by having more players play within the multiplayer parts of the game. And maybe you can go even one step further and have a free edition. So you're not choosing between one price point and one price, but maybe you should start considering having multiple different offers so you can satisfy multiple different players out there. So coming back to our revenue curve, if you do use this model and you try to apply it to your game, well, maybe your revenue curve doesn't look like this. Maybe it looks a bit more like this. And congrats, you've generated more revenue upfront, so that's a good thing. But if you're looking to keep investing in your game and for players to keep interacting with your product, well, maybe that's not sustainable through time, because as you advance, even though you have higher priced additions for a game, through discounts and the fact that players will be purchasing less and less, it won't be sustainable through time. You're driving less and less revenue in that manner. So how can we compensate for this? Well, that covers it for the entry price, but let's now take a look at products and services. So basically, the idea here is to use your game as an e-commerce platform. So what you do again is add more value, not take away, not remove any stuff from the game, but find ways in which you can offer more in an optional manner. Now, this is really important. It has to be optional, and what you're adding in, if you're not purchasing, for players that are not purchasing it, should still have really a great experience within the game. But for those that are purchasing it, can maybe get even more value out of it. So we usually call these microtransactions, right? And I know what you're thinking. You're probably like, hey, wait a second. Did you say microtransactions? Like, aren't those like really bad, or are they good? Like, what's the deal with microtransactions? Well, congrats, you've unlocked a new side quest. So let's question everything and let's talk trash about microtransactions. So what I would say is that you should keep in mind that the price of a game hasn't really moved in the past couple of decades. However, the price of making games has really increased through time. So if you look at the cartridge era, there's been a couple of bumps in the road there, but it's probably stayed almost the same. And through the disc era, leading up to 2014, it's gone down. And more recently, it's keep going down by the fact that there's more and more free-to-play games out there. If we look at Ubisoft specifically, um, we can see that there is a demand for microtransactions. So with everything that's on screen right now, what you should keep in mind is that the revenue for Ubisoft starting from Q2 of 2017, the revenue made from microtransactions actually surpassed the revenue made from digital distribution of games. And this is a trend that's increasing through time. And now where we are is that microtransactions are are responsible for about a third of the revenue that we're generating at Ubisoft. So what I think we should keep in mind when we're looking at this data is that microtransactions are not only necessary to reach and to sustain profitability at this point in time, but I would even argue that it is desired by the player, because we wouldn't be performing as well and selling so much if there wasn't a demand out there for them. But I do want to precise here, it is if it is done well, right? And I can't stress this enough. You have to do them well. And if you're not doing it well, then maybe you're crashing and burning like we saw at the beginning. Um, and we've made mistakes in the past. Like Ubisoft hasn't been perfect. We've made mistakes in this manner as well. But coming back to the idea in itself, you're building a relationship, right, with your player base. So I would suggest meeting with them face to face. And we do have the luxury of being able to do this at Ubisoft with our research labs. We can invite players, have a chat with them, and then see how they can react to the fact that we're trying to build these microtransactions, and actually kind of build them together with them and see if we are offering interesting value and something that's interesting for them. So if you are going to do it, how should you do it? Well, what has value within your game? You should start off by asking yourself that question, and then ask, can it be monetized? Usually the answer to this one is yes, a lot of things can be monetized. That's an easy one to answer, but the hard one to answer is, should it be monetized? How does it impact the player experience? And then how can that provide a lasting positive experience as you move forward? So what you do is that you take all your different game systems, and then you take different value propositions, and you start mixing and matching. You start saying, okay, if I have a character in my world, can I add in a value tied to cosmetics, add in a value that's tied to gameplay, add in a value tied to the content, community, or time, or comfort, or whatnot, right? So then you end up with this huge list as you're brainstorming of all these different pieces of content that can potentially be added within the game. So when you do this, what you try to do is that you try to have some that are permanent, some that are consumable, and some that are recurring. So an example of this is permanent would be like, for example, cosmetic upgrades for your character. Consumable would be like a potion that gives you temporary benefits and then wear off through time. And then recurring would be like an XP boost that lasts a certain time, but that necessarily you have also the option to keep on forever. And the reason why you want these three different types of microtransactions is because they each have their own revenue profiles, right? And if you combine all these different revenue profiles together, you have something that looks a little bit more like this, something that's more predictable, something that's more stable through time, so that you're maybe more able to predict the outcome of your performance and build a better revenue strategy for your game. So as you're doing this, you're trying to build something for everyone. You're also trying to build different value propositions and combinable offers so that players can mix and match a bit what they want for them. So let's dive into a second model that makes this possible, which I would call fractionalization. So not the easiest word to say out there. And the value proposition for this model is for players to build their own fantasy. So for example, if you have this character and it has an appearance, equipment, abilities, progression, social, and whatnot, you can choose to monetize plenty of different things on your character, right? So whether it's cosmetics through the equipment, emotes, signage, weapons, or more, or the gameplay of it. So if you have a class system and you want to sell multiple classes or heroes within that class, or power-ups, whether they're temporary or permanent, whether I would advise to not do pay to win though, or the progression aspect. So if it's limited inventory space and you're adding in more, if it's progression of your character and so let's, for the use of this example, just stick to cosmetics, right? It's not because that you can monetize everything that you should monetize everything. So for this example, let's focus on the cosmetics. So let's say you have this base character, either that you've earned for free through the purchasing the game, or it's free to play and some of them are offered for free, and you want to change the visual appearance of your hero. Well, maybe there's this cosmetic skin that's available for $10, and maybe there's another one that's available for $15 that's higher value because it's just more awesome, right? An example of a game that did this is Heroes of the Storm. Now, what I want to point out here is within this particular example or the skin, everything is baked together, right? So the social elements that are tied to the skin, whether it's voice lines or animations or emotes or dance moves that are tied to the appearance that you're purchasing, or the hair, the mouth, the nose, the equipment, the sword, the shoulder pads, everything is baked in together, and you're buying that for $10, or you're buying that for example, $15. Well, I would advise that maybe this isn't the best idea, right? This is not the model that we're trying to move forward with. And I think I think the reason why this model hasn't worked very well for Blizzard on this game in particular, for Heroes of the Storm, is because they didn't apply very well this model. They could have gone a step further. So what does it mean using fractionalization and going a step further? Well, you take your character and you start breaking everything into pieces, right? So instead of having everything that's one big piece and you sell that one big piece, well, then maybe you're breaking everything into little pieces. So your equipment is not one big piece of equipment. Maybe it's an armor and some weapons. Maybe it's your armor is not even an armor. Maybe it's arms, boots, body armor, pants, helmet. Your weapons, maybe you have multiple weapons, and then you can keep breaking that off. So for example, your helmet is not just a helmet. Maybe it has an ornament or a visor, and then maybe that's broken again into other pieces. So like the color or the material that's used. So you kind of see where I'm going with this. And then you can repeat that process for the body, the head, and maybe also social aspects like animations, dance moves, and stuff like that. So if we compare breaking everything into pieces and not doing it, is it really a good thing or a bad thing, right? Well, let's take three players for an example. So we have Steve that Steve doesn't want to spend in the game. He wants everything as much as he can for free. Well, he can get the base hero for free, no problem there. Mary is willing to invest a bit more because there's one cosmetic skin that's really good for her. She enjoys, and then the Legend 27, maybe no matter what, will just purchase everything, right? And then spends $25 to get everything. Well, if you fractionalize some of your content, you don't have all these things baked together. You have plenty of little different pieces, and you're not. So basically, you're trying to add more stuff, right? But it's just that the more stuff you're adding is broken into smaller pieces rather than into one big chunks. And the fact that you're doing this allows you to offer more value per specific item that you're offering. So if you have all this extra inventory that's available to you, well, maybe you can be more generous and offer even more stuff for free, right? But also the maximal value that's attainable is in fact greater. So coming back to our players, a player like Steve can still get the hero for free, but also extra stuff for free, right? And then Mary is purchasing again for the same price point, $10, because she doesn't want to invest more. But instead of having only one skin, she has plenty of different components that she can choose to mix and match to build many different visuals as she chooses to do so. And then maybe you have that whale of a player that no matter what will invest a maximal amount and will still purchase everything. Well, then you're maximizing a bit more your revenue here, because even though you're satisfying people like Steve and Mary, you also satisfy people like the Legend 27, which will earn you more revenue per player. So a game, we did this for Honor. It worked really well. So I think you can agree with me that For Honor is really a beautiful game, and you can customize your character to an extent which is just completely crazy. So again, the value proposition is for players to build their own fantasy as they see fit. And this is so on the player side, they can mix and match as they want. And on the developer side, while you're capturing more value per character, per cosmetic skin that you're creating. So again, this is a win-win relationship. But where this model really particularly takes off is if you can repeat the process for multiple heroes, right? Something that's been done on Rainbow Six or For Honor or other games like the 2 or Genshin Impact. So this example has been applied to the character in itself, but fractionalization as a model can be applied to other game systems. For example, player housing. In a game like Path of Exile, which is an awesome game, by the way, you should check it out, you can customize your own hideout. So this is a before and after, and you can purchase all different elements to make that happen, as we mentioned, for the character. So coming back to our revenue curve, looking a bit something like this. If you are adding in microtransactions, well, maybe it does allow you the possibility to sustain your profitability through time, and also giving you the means by which you can keep investing into your game and providing more and more content at a better experience through time to your players. So if that covers it for our fourth component, now let's take a look at the distribution systems. So if you have all these different pieces of content in the game, how are you integrating them into your experience? Well, there's typically three ways of doing so. You can do it in a direct fashion, sometimes in a randomized fashion, or in a progressive fashion. So a couple of examples, you could have an in-game store where you can purchase cosmetic items. This would be a direct manner of integrating them within the experience. But one I think that is really worth diving a bit deeper into is the battle pass. And this one would be a progression way of introducing content into the game. And this leads me to our third model that we'll be looking at. So I would call this maybe a fidelity plan, if I were to really tag a word on what is the model behind a battle pass. And the value for the player, well, is to be rewarded for extended engagement. So for those of you that don't necessarily know in great detail what a battle pass is, well, it monetizes aspects of gameplay, cosmetics, and time. So you have a free tier. you have a premium tier, and then rewards that are given to you as you complete gameplay objectives. So if we look at an example, you have, this one is, for example, from Fortnite. You have all these different tiers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 7. We only see 7 here, but it can reach up to 100. And as you're progressing through these tiers by completing challenges, well, you're unlocking rewards. And you have a free track, which has some rewards, but not many. And you have a premium track, which you can pay for example, for $10, and have just multiply the quantity of rewards that you're obtaining as you're progressing through this this pass. And the reason why I think this is a really smart one to dive into is because really it's combining many different models into one, and why it's for me one of the reasons why it's been so successful. So if we look a bit deeper, it ties in some aspects of freemium, right? So there's a free track that's given, but players, so they get an automatic free value of just interacting with the system without spending anything. But if you want to go a step further and get even more stuff, well then, as you're experiencing it, at all times, you can choose to upgrade to the more premium version of it. There's also a tripwire that's implicated in here. So for those aren't familiar with the tripwire and profit multiplier combination, I'm guessing you have them in your homes. So you can think of a printer. So the tripwire for the printer is the printer itself, the machine. So it's very low cost, it's high value, it's awesome. You get this printer that almost costs nothing. But then the cartridges are the way that the profit multiplier really increases and drives revenue on the sale of the product in itself. An Nespresso machine is the same with the little coffee capsules. So this is a model that is really present in many other aspects of life. In the business, the battle pass, the way it takes shape is that as soon as you unlock that first premium tier, you get instant a lot of value. So if the battle pass costs $10, well then you're packaging maybe $30 worth of value in that first tier. So as soon as you get it, you get like immediate, really strong, compelling value. But then players still have to invest time within the game to unlock all the progressive other rewards as they move along. And this is where the profit multiplier comes in. So basically, you have all these different tiers, but they're not guaranteed. You have to invest time to unlock them all. So if you reach the end of the limit, because there is a limit, you have a specific time frame to complete all of this, well, a battle pass typically offers the possibility for players to purchase a tier if they didn't manage to reach it. So think of the little capsules that you're purchasing, each individual tier being an extra capsule. And it's kind of a semi-subscription based model because it's set for a specific time frame. So usually a battle pass lasts for a season, so a couple of months, and then there's a new one, and then a new one, and a new one. So basically, if you're purchasing every one, it's as if you're kind of subscribed to the game, if you will. It's just that it's open, it's transparent, it's split into smaller chunks, so considered more fair towards the player. So this has been a model that works really, really well, in part because of these reasons, but you should still be careful when using it. An example of this is Marvel's Avengers. They tried to not only use the Battle Pass, but apply it not at the game level, but at the hero level, so that every character has its own Battle Pass that is progressing through. And this was somewhat criticized because 10 or even more than 10 farther down the road battle passes within the same game is kind of a lot. So if this covers it for our distribution systems and the way that we introduce the content, all these different pieces of content within the game, let's look at the game economy, right? However, being a bit short on time, and due to the complexity of creating and managing an in-game economy, I'm gonna cheat here. I'm gonna insert a little cheat. I'm gonna press up, up, down, down, left, right, B, A, and start for all you old school gamers out there that remember this era of gaming, and then skip this level. I will say, however, that when you are designing your economy, the base kind of mentality that you should be applying is that players can choose to invest real money if they are to get that extra value within the experience. Or you can also offer ways and means by which players are not investing real money. They're rather investing time, so that you can be as fair as you can and as generous as you can with as many players as you can. So that covers it for all the different components of the video game business model formula. So congratulations, you've kind of had a high-level view of all the 5 key components that you can start working with if you are to build the business model of your game. So what would be the next step afterwards, right? So if you have all these different components, how are they interacting together? And how should you go about choosing which ones to choose? Well, you can start building different scenarios. So the way that you go about it is that you define the content scope for, let's say, about 1 year of content for all these different pieces. And then you can start doing a bit of benchmarking on acquisition, retention, and monetization metrics. So you're going to look at how many players are coming into your game. You're going to look at how many players are staying into your game and what percentage of players are interacting with your extra pieces of content that are paid for, and for an average amount of how much, right? And then as you look at these benchmarks, what you're trying to see is, well, that at the end of X period of time, let's say 1 year, help me reach profitability. So what you can start doing is evaluating different scenarios. So do you want to go for an in-game store in a free-to-play game that has a battle pass and a micro subscription, and that monetizes comfort, time savers, and story packs, for example, and then you try and see if that helps you reach profitability while still aiming for the positive player experience that you're trying to aim for. Or maybe that's not what you want. Maybe you're building another scenario and comparing it to the previous one, where you say, well, maybe, you know what, I'm going to try for loot boxes, monetize gameplay, cosmetics, time savers, and story packs in a free-to-play title, and see if that allows me to reach profitability. Or maybe you say, well, you know what, maybe not. We're going to aim more towards having a price tag on our game, but still having kind of a lighter approach to a store, consumables, and comfort, and see if that helps us to reach profitability. So when you're doing this evaluation, I just want to say there are tools out there. So I can't necessarily give a great detail into these because they're kind of inside tools that we have at Ubisoft. But there are tools out there, and you should try to build your own or work with people that maybe have built some in the past, where you can try and build models where you can project the revenue in these different scenarios. But as you're doing this, again, keep in mind, it's not only about maximizing revenue when you're building your model, it's also about player fairness. So monetization will always be a controversial subject because of the way it interacts within the experience. So please do try and be as fair as you can, and try and find tools by which you can measure the fairness uh, the fairness of the experience you're providing through the added content. And congratulations, this is another quest that's complete. So you've honed your crafting skills, you've dived a bit deeper into how business models are built, and again, a new black crystal has been added to your inventory. But that's not the only quest you've completed. You've also seen 3 different models along the way, and another black crystal has been added to your inventory. So now our final quest, let's use foresight and dive into the future and look at where will we be in 2025 and 2030. So my first prediction is that we're going to see the rise of paid user-generated content. So as we're moving forward through time, we're no longer structured where there's always a consumer and this corporation that's offering products or services. More and more people have the ability and the tools and the means by which they can create their own products and services and offer them in a more direct fashion. So we're moving towards more collaborative economies, right? And this, I feel, will also be the case for the video game industry, where we won't necessarily only see video game developers being the ones that are creating the product and capturing the revenue that are made from these, but we'll maybe see content creators being involved and benefiting from the content that they can create in a more direct manner. So an example of this that we've already seen in the past is through Valve and their game Team Fortress. Basically, they allowed players to create different cosmetic options for the game, and then Valve, through an approval process, looks at these, approves them, and then integrates them in their in-game store. And then once they do that, they share part of the revenue with the content creator. So this is, I feel, one example, and I really don't understand why there's not more out there, but I truly believe that we're going to see more and more. Another example of how we're moving towards collaborative economies is the marketing aspect of it. So building a game and marketing it usually goes through a big marketing spend through all these multiple channels. But again, more and more companies are relying on, game developers are relying on content creators to kind of uphold the message and be vocal about their appreciation for the game, and rely more and more on them to market their games. And it becomes this win-win relationship where the content creator can also get a share of the revenue by doing that. Second prediction, persistent virtual value. So right now, if you purchase a piece of content within a game, well, usually it's tied within that economy. You can't extract it out of it. It's stuck in there, and that's about it, right? So as long as you keep investing in the game and playing in it, and sure, the value is maintained, but it's still kind of stuck in there. I believe that what we're going to see with the rise of crypto technology is the fact that we're going to be able to more and more extract virtual values out of their economies and start maybe sharing them either for their inherent value, because we're able to start measuring that if it's persistent, or even maybe sharing it within multiple economies. So an example of this is CryptoCats, which went viral a couple of years back. I think it was really kind of ahead of its time. Basically, you could get these cats. All of them are unique, and they can be traced back to their owner, and you can breed multiple cats together to create new ones, again, which are all unique. So you can collect all these different cute cats, which have an inherent value, and then you can trade them with other players. And if this technology really takes root within a larger scale within the video game industry, well, then I believe this kind of leads me to a third prediction, where we're not only going to be seeing moving from transmedia storytelling and moving towards connected experiences, but we'll also be moving towards connected economies. So an example of transmedia storytelling and connected experiences, I feel a really great one is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So it was a phenomenal challenge, I bet, for the people behind this to create all these different storylines that had their own separate value, but also tied into this bigger storyline. So you have all these different products that have a value on their own, but that still communicate with each other in some way, right? So we see this from a narrative and a storytelling perspective, but I feel that as we're going to be moving forward, we might see this in the game industry, where you can have this huge game that's an overarching experience, if you will, which has potentially game modes and services and whatnot, and keeps extending itself through time and being pertinent through time, and adding more and more content. But then maybe you also start seeing additional games coming into the environment within the same brand, telling another part of that same story that's enjoyable in itself, or even more enjoyable if it's kind of connected in some way and you're enjoying both the bigger game and the smaller one that's tied to it. And then maybe you have another one, and then maybe you have a companion app or an interactive narrative series, and then you can just keep adding on more content within this platform that's interacting with each other. All of which are appreciable separately, but kind of have a higher value when they're all brought together. But what really I feel is the kind of the next step and where we'll be in the future is that right now we don't really see game economies being that much connecting between each other. It really is a challenge with our current limitations to do that. But I do feel that with persistent virtual value, that might start be the case moving forward in the future. So where, for example, you have this really awesome, unique weapon that you found in game one, and then you want to bring it into that bigger experience, well, then maybe you can do that in the future. I think that'd be pretty amazing. I thought that Riot Games, they recently announced that they were building 10 new games, and I thought this is it. They're going to be the next one to do it. Like they're going to go all in Marvel Universe style. But I'm starting to question if that's really their approach now that they've revealed. So I'm still looking at who will be the next big player that tries and bring that reality, bring that vision into a reality. So congratulations, that's our final quest that is complete. You have acquired another black crystal, so we have successfully used the time travel. So on an end note, now that you know the video game business model formula, and maybe you know a bit more how to use it, and you also know that we're moving more and more towards collaborative, connected, and persistent virtual economies, then the question that I would ask you is, well, what is the right business model for your game? And if you want to keep the conversation going, well, feel free to contact me. My email is on screen as we speak. It'll be my pleasure to have a chat with you one-on-one. So please don't be shy. It's always a pleasure and a passion for me to discuss business models, especially when they're connected to video games. A little word of warning, however, contacting me is not free. There is an entry price. That entry price is precisely 4 black crystals. But I'm sure if you check your inventory right now, you should be fine. So thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure having this conference and presenting a bit more perspective on how you can build a model for your game. So if ever you have any questions, feel free to contact me. It'll be a pleasure to answer them. Thank you.